All right, so here we are. This is going to be a little short lecture on chapter 9. I want to let you know there'll be some things on the exam that'll be in here. So, it's one of the reasons you need to watch the videos, and then we'll discuss part of the discussion. I'll bring the discussion topic for this chapter in for the thing. So, Chapter 9 is self, society, and culture, right? So we're going to be talking about gender identities. We're going to figure out gender identities. And, so, right, so every chapter we have so gender identity, the biology, the roles, and how does culture affect us in this? Maybe the biggest thing. All right. So we want to understand sex and gender in development and in the context of how we grow, right? So what's the difference between sex and gender? And we're going to get into that, and we'll talk about the LGBTQ, AIA populations and all the different variations. We'll be looking at gender identity and how people express that identity, right? Uh, and the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation, and where we are. So here's the spectrum of gender identity, right? And that's where I put this in, right? So I figured it wasn't gonna. So the way things are today, either way I put this, it was gonna. Somebody told me I should have did it the other way. Anyway, gender is not a it's not a black and white thing, right? So when we talk about black and white thinking, we would say you're female or you're male, right? That's black and white. You get one choice or another. But the world don't work that way, and neither does a gender identity. You We're here, like most of our life is in this gray area. I tell everybody all the time, our life is pretty much in the gray area. Typically we're somewhere here. Now, somewhere in your mind, you have a picture of what you think masculinity is. Like, what's the masculine person like? What would that look like? And who would I be if I was this person? Or who would I want to be? Like, and I have a superhero or or somebody. I have a picture of somebody who's like the total masculine ideal. And the same thing on the other side. We have some kind of picture of what the perfect like the most feminine female would be. Right? Doesn't mean that those pictures are right or wrong. They're just our own personal measures, right, of how this works. But most of us are here, right? Like when I was growing up, there was a guy called the Marlboro Man. Sorry about that. It's I'm telling them they need to update. And he was like the cowboy, right? We grew up with my generation of cowboys were the men, that we kind of wanted to be. And I don't know, like Donna Reed, there was shows of 50s housewives and 60s housewives that, were not realistic. They may have been realistic at one time, but it was never, my house was never like those ideals, right? So we're here somewhere, right? And of course, we're gonna be talking about the transit. A lot. This topic will be a lot about transitions and stuff. But the truth is, men have feminine traits, which moves us down this continuum to someplace, right? And women have masculine traits that move them towards this way down the continuum. And so we land somewhere here, or wherever it is, right? So it just make sure I just want you to understand that, right? Like, because a lot of your, because even in now not so much, but it used to be you check the box whether you were male or female, and a lot of people felt slighted because their boxes didn't fit them, right? I mean, we all, even to this day, I'm like, oh, there's no box that I like, on a lot of scales, not just this one. All right. So, how does your culture influence your gender roles? You're gonna be working on that a little. What does a cisgender mean, right? And that means I am in congruent with the sex that I was born, right? So we're going to talk about sex versus gender, right? Gender norms and variance, right? I want to define gender congruence, and really that's kind of what the definition of cisgender is. I'm congruent with the sex and gender I was born into. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. So here we go. The concepts of sex and gender are deeply ingrained in our Western identities, but in the worldwide too, right? However, right now this is true. People are much more open. People are much more willing to have the courage to take a risk, even though it can be challenging, at least to say the least, right? Um, we're learning more and more about why people feel that way or believe that way, or trying to doing a lot of research about how people come to these decisions about their gender identity and that kind of thing, right? And what the influences are that bring that about. So sex, right? Sex is what we're born. So I'm born with male genitalia. I'm born with all the male plumbing, all the male fixtures, and that's it. So I'm sexual. I'm a male, right, at birth, or you're a female. Right? Now there are some, right? There's the exceptions, right? Some because of, like, if you ever think about how babies are born and all the millions, hundreds of thousands of cells that need to line up in your DNA and all that. Um, so every once in a while things go sideways, right? We have a lot of different types of things that affect people, and sometimes it has to do with your sexual organs. But, but the majority of people are born with either male or female genitalia, right? And so uh, that's our sex. But gender is how I identify myself, how I see myself on that continuum, right? Like I am fairly probably here, right? Like I'm a pretty much typical male. Um, I mean, I'm not this guy, but I'm like, my feminine side is not as developed as many people think it probably should be. Anyway, right? So that's it. So I have my gender identity, how I see myself. And then there's a gender role of how people see us, how our culture looks at us, and what the expectations are, and uh, how that affects us, right? And then the cisgender, as I said before, the person whose behaviors and identity are incongruent or in line with the traditional gender role or the sex that they were born into. Talked about the differences, right, and how so this is the development of our sex, right? So X and Y will typically produce a man child, and an XX combination in your DNA typically produces a female child. There are XX males, and there are XX female, XY female. So it gets, like I said, if you understand what it takes at conception to create a embryo and all that, and all the DNA that has to line up perfectly, and all the things that have to go perfectly, yeah, sometimes it's amazing that we have consistency in children and how they come out. But every once in a while, at least, and it doesn't go right, and so things change, and that affects people biologically, emotionally, physiologically, all of that. But we're not going to delve into that too much right here, and you're going to read all this, right? So here's the X female, the chromosome, two X chromosomes. You have ovaries, estrogen. These are the traits. These are the physical things that go along with that. The XY male has testes, androgen, semen, ejaculation ducts, penis, all of that, right? So, however, there's sexual dysmorphism, which is what I've been saying when things don't line up exactly the way that they normally do. And it doesn't account for all the variations among human bodies, but it's usually does. An intersexuality condition of someone being biologically between a male and a female. So there's many variations that can come about. I'm not going to go through all of this, and you can see this list right here, and then what these syndromes are. So these are the most common ones, right? That we document, that we have good information about, and how that relates. And but there are more. Don't worry about that. It's just a summary, right? I'm going to talk about the differences. You're going to read all about this. I'm not going to get into it too far. But I wanted to talk, like culturally nowadays, gender, transgender, gender identities are much more, people are much more fluid and much more presenting much more, many different gender roles along that continuum, right? So as a male, even if let me go back here real quick. As a male, even if I have a number of all the feminine traits that move me down here, it does not make me female, right? Like you got to understand, and a female obviously who has masculine traits does not make him a man, right? That's their choice. It's them that have to label themselves, right? And so, um, I'm going to go through this little vignette, right? So, you guys don't know, but I was a therapist. I mean, I am a licensed therapist, and I, worked with school children. I supervised therapists that worked with school children. So I wanted to put this little thing in here just for, actually, this is a discussion if you guys want amongst yourselves. This is not the discussion topic for this chapter, but this is something like you could add to, you guys can start your own discussion about, right? So we have one who is a 10-year-old first generation Mexican American boy. He's living with both his parents in a culturally traditional household, right? He also has, so first generation, right? His parents were born in Mexico. He has two older brothers, 12 and 13, and two sisters, 11 and 9. One likes to play with his sisters and likes to join in when mom is teaching the girls to cook, etc. But his father has always encouraged him to go with him and his brothers to play football or baseball, but he prefers to remain home reading and enjoying the company of his mom and sisters. His brothers are constantly telling him, "You need to come with us and stop acting like a girl." And dad is always pushing him and telling him, "You need to be more like your brothers." So and one day, one comes into school and he goes to go see the counselor, and he tells the counselor he's a girl. And this is actually like based on a true story. Like this is not far fetched. So, um, what do you think? You can put your thoughts out there. You can make it anonymous. Like I said, this is your own discussion. It's not graded. Or you don't have to comment at all. Um, but this is not uncommon nowadays. But is it, so just think about it. Right? That's all. It's just a vignette for thought and discussion, if you like. So, and now here's the big thing. Culturally, how do I develop? Right? Like the most cultures like have their definitions of men and women, right? They have men and roles, like I talked about, you know, uh, Hispanic countries, Hispanic in the Hispanic culture, pretty much across all of the different types. Uh, it's a very patriotic. Father is the thing, uh, you know. Father makes the rules. Father does that. He may be this is probably the disciplinarian. It's a very patriarchal system, right? And there's a matriarchal systems where the females and the mothers are more in charge. At any rate, our culture has a role expectation for us. And unfortunately, we don't always feel comfortable in that, right? That's why it's like, I am not a hetero, people are like, I'm not a heterosexual male. I'm attracted to men. I am not a heterosexual female. I am sexually attracted to women. I'm not sexually attracted to anybody, or I'm sexually attracted to whoever I happen to be attracted to at the moment. And male, female does not really come into play for me. It's whoever I'm attracted to. So there's multiple variations, right? But how do we come to terms with that? And how are we able to deal with that in our culture? Right? And I mean, we have a culture that's our family unit is typically that we first have to deal with. A lot of times people are much different outside that culture, right? Into the bigger world culture, right? And then we find our own culture where we fit into, and it has nothing to do with that culture, and we try to keep that boxed in. This is just some of the challenges for people who don't fit into the box we want to put them in, right? Uh, so, you'll talk, about being able to come out of the closet, being able to express yourself when you feel free to do that, when you have support to do that, when you have those things, right? So this is your discussion topic for this chapter, and this is the graded discussion. So, how has your culture, your family, your religion, your geography, etc., and the greater culture of the world affected your gender identity as you are developing it? So, remember, your initial comment must be at least 50 words, and you need to respond to at least one classmate. Okay? That's our discussion topic. It's in the assignments, and it's worth 20 points, 10 for your first response, and 10 for your second. And I will be adjusting the syllabus. All right, so gender identity and expression, the way, how do I do this? My clothes, my hair, like now, right? So people will go to surgery. There's all kinds of ways. Sometimes people just dress in the role of the other gender if if they believe transgender. Some of them go through the entire process of surgery, hormone, like there's all different, like I said, a continuum. Nothing's black and white. So, uh, mm. So here's a history. So here's the big deal, right? So the first surgery from a male to a female was done in the 1950s, right? I was born in the 1950s. Like that's a long time ago. We were, we already learned about the struggles and we talk about it. So right, but that was one time, and man, that was like a big deal, right? At that time, like people fit traditional roles. Don't get me wrong. There was gay people in gay communities and lesbian communities, but it was much more underground. Like there was not a lot of, there was no open sexuality type things like there is today and has been for a while. So how this happens, like I said, nature versus nature, right? Nature versus nature. How does it develop? How do we decide? What has influenced us? All those things that come along. And how do we do this? And I'm not going to read all this, right? But this is the conversion process. If you want to go from male to female and from female to male. And so here's about androgyny. So there's no gender conformity. They're non-binary, and sometimes they have no desire for sex. Hmm? Or I talked about the fluidity earlier, right? Um, so these things, right? These are some of the things that some of the cultural things, right, that influence our a person's ability to be the person they are versus what the expectation is, right? So I may be scared. I may not have this feel safe to do that, right? I um I may or may not be able to ever have children, or how does that work? And then am I able to work and survive as in the role that I want to project, in the role of who I am versus the role of what my expectation is. See, so those are just a very short list of the cultural impacts, right? And then here's some more. Parents, caregivers, right? These are the people that socialize us. And prejudice, of course, there's sexism, prejudice, right? Gender inequality, all those things that anybody who's not the norm suffer, or is not pictured as the norm suffer. I don't really like that word norm. I use the word average a lot, right? The average person, right? So I think we're about at the end of this thing. I'm not going to get into this social justice, prejudice, like all the things that you're going to be reading more about. And and a lot of you may still be trying to develop this role and trying to understand yourself and all that. I put this in here as some support stuff. So, right, I said there's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of baggage, I guess, maybe that comes along with not fitting the box, right? And so in San Joaquin County, we have the San Joaquin Pride Center. It's right around the corner from my house, and here's the website. You can go and see. I just cut and paste that off the front page. Uh, but there's a lot of support there. If you have questions, if you're questioning, if you're looking for support, looking for activities, looking for a group of people that may be more aligned with like who you would like to be with, rather than who's available to you at the moment. Any of those things, right? And then unfortunately, this caused these situations. When you don't fit in the box, it can cause a lot of psychological pain. And so so suicide rates among transgenders, gay, lesbian, especially youth, are are too high, way too high. And so the Trevor Project is literally about, if you are suicidal, if you even have any kind of inkling like that, you can go here and take a look at this. Okay. So you can take a look at it anyway. You're just curious. You may know somebody, so be aware that there is a lot of support out there for you. All right. I'm going to minimize that, go back to my garden. And that's it. So don't forget to do your discussions, your smart books, your quiz for this week. And we'll be moving on to chapter 10.